Breakdowns in communication, our inability to connect well with our students in the classroom, and not establishing clear boundaries regarding behaviors can all be contributing factors to incivility in the classroom as well as in the clinical setting. What are some of those key strategies, specifically, at least three key strategies that you want to bring into your classroom experience with your learners? And classroom can mean any area where learning happens. That can be in the skills lab as well as in the clinical setting. Welcome back, everybody, to Dr. Sellars Educate. We are going to explore the topic of incivility. Now, I know many of you have had these direct experiences over the past several weeks or even several years where you've just seen an increase in student incivility. The research tells us that when students and when our nurses are not civil, it can lead to breakdown in communication, even causing patient harm. We want to take steps that are evidence based to integrate these strategies into our classroom so we do not have to experience, or at least less likely to experience, some of these incivil behaviors that we're going to talk about. So, first and foremost, we're going to be going through our thought provoking questions just like we always do. We're going to be talking about what does incivility look like in nursing education? Why is it such a pressing issue? And how can it negatively affect student learning? Well, many of you have had these experiences firsthand. And so, what we want to do, just like every single snapshot, we want you to go ahead and write down what is your objective? What are the takeaways, at least one takeaway that you want to be able to walk away with and implement right away? Okay. And then the second step we want you to take is to pull out your workbook. Okay. If you have the study workbook, that's great if you're on the journey to C and E. And if you're not on the journey, then we want you to pull out Billings and Halstead. So if you don't have the study workbook or if you're not on the journey, that's fine. We want you to pull out Billings and Halstead, the sixth edition. Chapter 15, there's an entire chapter that is dedicated to this topic. We're going to be pointing out some of these key elements, and we want you to walk with us as we talk through content that's going to help you clarify any muddy points if you're on the journey to C and E, or if you're just looking to integrate some of these evidence-based strategies that we'll be talking about. And then if you want to take a look in your actual handbook, we are exploring competency 1, which is facilitate learning. H, list out the importance of ensuring a positive and safe learning environment. Competency 2, facilitate learning development and socialization, being able to facilitate a self reflective process with our students and to identify some of these important socialization skills and abilities that we'll explore. Also, in competency 2 is being able to engage our learners in thoughtful and constructive self and peer evaluation. Flip over to page 9 is where you're going to see content regarding competency 5, which I describes being able to manage conflict effectively. How many of us really enjoy conflict? Right? There's probably no hands raised. Well, the reason why is because it can create chaos in our classroom. It can also be a distraction for the learning experience. And so, our ability to minimize conflict, to manage situations that may arise in our classroom, really starts with taking a proactive approach. All right, so let's see what else is listed in our blueprint that is included in the candidate handbook. The last point we would say is taking a look at competency 8, functioning within the organizational environment and academic community. There are so many specific behaviors that are outlined in competency 8 that really do map back to this really important topic of incivility that we're discussing. What is the definition of incivility? Well, simply stated, it is being rude or unsociable, inappropriate behavior. And in nursing education, this can include verbal abuse, intimidating behaviors, or disparaging or negative or comments that talk down, that make someone feel like that they are being talked down to, or even creating behaviors. Sometimes they can be nonverbal that created this toxic atmosphere that is mentioned here. Why is it so important? Well, the research still tells us that when we promote incivility by not addressing it, because that's what happens if we don't address the uncivil behaviors, then we are promoting incivility. There is a breakdown in communication, and ultimately, patients suffer. There's negative patient outcomes associated when we don't communicate effectively because there may be some of these horizontal violence behaviors that have been demonstrated, and it causes students not to speak up, and it contributes to this unhealthy work environment. NLN talks about the important competencies that are associated with our ability to really foster this respectful learning environment. It really provides a guide for us to support student well-being. Effective communication. How do we establish these standards? Well, first, we want to talk about role modeling. We want to develop content in our courses that is aligned with our learning objectives. We want to be mindful of our exam blueprint and how thorough it is, making sure that there's alignment with the different levels across Bloom's taxonomy for the 3 learning domains, and making sure that it's mapped back to teaching strategies and content that we have integrated into the classroom. And let's go ahead and talk about busy work. Okay. I know that many students oftentimes feels like they may feel like we give them busy work, but how many of us know it really is to foster their learning experiences outside of the classroom? We want to engage in Kolb experiential learning theory and Malcolm Knowles adult learning theory. And this is going to allow students to begin the learning process even before they come into our classroom. We do that through ticket to class. We can use the flipped classroom model, but these are all ways that we can engage student in the adult learning theory, also known as andragogy. For students that may still feel like it's busy work, I think it's important for us to talk about what those learning objectives are that's aligned to the content and the assignments that we are making for our students. So that's one tip, just making sure that we're clearly communicating alignment between the work that we are assigning our students and the value that it is going to have for them. Maybe not immediately. All right, so I'm thinking about adaptive quizzing, but we want to help connect the dots for students. When we talk about incivility, let's have candid conversations with our students about the behaviors that we're seeing and about the negative impact it can have on patient care. All right, so let's go ahead and skip over to our thought-provoking question. So here we go. During a group project, one student repeatedly interrupts and dismisses the ideas of another student, stating that their contributions are irrelevant. The affected student expresses discomfort but remains silent. This scenario exemplifies which of the following concepts in the context of incivility in nursing education. So we have A, implicit bias in team dynamics, B, the impact of power dynamics on group collaboration, or C, the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. And just like the questions on the C and E, what we want you to think about is first and foremost, what is it that I know for sure about content related to this question? And another question is, what is this question truly asking me? Okay, so let me open the question up again so you can take a look at it. And then I want you to write down on that study worksheet which option you think is best, which is the correct answer for this question, for this scenario. All right, now we want to go back to content before we wrap up our time together in this snapshot. How do we establish these communication standards? Well, it first starts just as described on page 271. It first starts with us being clear about the expectations related to behaviors. So, as an example, when we're going over the syllabus on day 1, let's talk about ground rules in the classroom, that we will be respectful of our student colleagues and the consequences associated when we are not respectful. Now, this does require us as faculty to also demonstrate these civil behaviors. Look at box 15.1 on page 271. It describes some of these uncivil faculty behaviors, and I want you all to take a note and do a little bit of self-reflection and identify, hopefully, behaviors that you have corrected. If any of these have shown up in your classroom in the past, I want you to write it down. This is about accountability as well, and just engaging in the self-reflective practices that we talk to our students about. So being unresponsive to student needs, targeting students, setting students up to fail, unprofessional behavior, threatening failure, favoritism, scare tactics, violation of due process, arrogance, and making unannounced course changes. All right, I'm going to say that last bullet point again, making unannounced course changes. Now, there may be a good reason for us to do that. However, this is determined to be an uncivil faculty behavior. Let's talk to our students about expectations on day one using the syllabus. Let's engage in a dialogue, a discussion with our students. And then, third of all, let's do some self reflective practices where we're thinking about whether or not we're demonstrating any of these uncivil behaviors and commit to correcting them as soon as possible. So, those are some strategies that we can use when it comes to breakdown in communication. We want to be clear about communication, and if there's an error in our communication regarding expectations or even patient care practices, let's correct that communication and make sure that students have a clear understanding about what the practices should be going forward. We want to engage in active listening, clearly articulating our expectations, and I would add writing it down. How many of you are visual learners? How many of you all are auditory learners? When it comes to communication, we tend to also favor that preferred learning style. If we're auditory learners, then great. Maybe we hear it, we process it the first time. But if we are more of a visual learner, we can struggle, right? Because we haven't seen it in writing. We want to consider that when we're giving instructions and when we're addressing any incivility in the classroom. Now, when we talk about culture of respect, this starts with us. We have to show up for our class on time. We have to come to class well prepared, and we have to be available for our students. We want to encourage these feedback loops where students have an opportunity to ask us about any content that may be a muddy point. Perhaps they're not connecting the dots. And sometimes they don't even tell us. Sometimes we can see that verbally. So we want to be mindful of that when we think about creating this culture of civility in our classroom, giving students time to really engage with us in a way that is going to encourage dialogue, open dialogue, where students feel safe, where they can share their concerns. We saw in our thought provoking question that there was some incivility between students. And we know students are not going to always agree. However, that shouldn't be our expectation. We want to make sure students understand that we create safe learning spaces for them to voice their opinions, their thoughts, their perspectives, and then we engage in a healthy dialogue. Our ability to ensure that students understand what that looks like can start with simple role playing, right? So we want to think about how can we create a realistic learning experience for our students as it relates to incivility, just like what we're doing here by showing the actual examples or case studies. All right, so with our thought-provoking question, if you chose C as the best option, let me get over to the correct one. All right. So if you chose C, that is not the correct option. Okay. I know I tried to trick you. So, C, the importance of maintaining professional boundaries, that is not going to exemplify the specific message we want to get to students, right? Because remember, this was about incivility between two students. Could we talk about professional behaviors and the role of consistently demonstrating them? Absolutely. And what we want to talk about with our students is the responsibility that they each have of supporting the inclusivity in the classroom to avoid leveraging these power dynamics and group collaboration. It may be that we have some students that are more vocal than others, and quite in reality, that's quite common. But we do not want to leave out students that may not be as expressive as others. We want to convey mutual respect with our students. We want them to not only collaborate with each other, but we want to be active, collaborative partners in our discussion. We want to role model these behaviors that we've set with our ground rules, and we want to also hold students accountable. You know, if we see acting out behaviors, we want to go ahead and address it as soon as it happens. We have a responsibility to shape our learning experiences for our students, and it starts with us being very clear around expectations. And when conflict comes up, we just want to acknowledge the conflict and use these conflict resolution techniques in real time with real scenarios. And hopefully, students have had a chance to practice these before they actually have to implement them. So, in our next snapshot, we're going to be continuing the discussion about how do we evaluate the effectiveness of us addressing incivility. How do we know that it's been effective? How is it measured? We hope that this snapshot has been helpful as you move forward on your journey to addressing incivility in your classroom. Hopefully, you've identified at least 3 key strategies that we've talked through, and make sure that you're using Chapter 15 in Billings and Halstead to guide you in your review. We'll see you in the next snapshot. Have a great one, everybody.